Unabashed.
The most unpredictable.
Becomes a headline.
The most volatile.
Outrageous behavior.
Unsubstantiated narratives. A battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grant Tamasha, a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. I'm your host, Milan Vaishnav. Gujarat Under Modi, Laboratory of Today's India, is a new book by the scholar Christophe Jaffrelot, but one that has a very old backstory. It's a definitive account of Narendra Modi's tenure as chief minister of the state of Gujarat, and it helps place into context the changes we've seen in national politics, economic policy, and society over the past 10 years under Prime Minister Modi. It's a book that Christophe started 20 years ago and is finally out in the world. To talk more about the book, Christophe Jaffrelot joins me today from Paris. He is the Avantha Chair and Professor of Indian Politics and Sociology at the King's India Institute. He teaches at Sciences Po in Paris and is also a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment. I'm pleased to welcome him back to the podcast. Christophe, I checked for the third time. It's nice to see you, and congrats on the book.
Thank you for the invitation, Manan.
So I think we have to start this conversation at the beginning. You submitted this manuscript, Gujarat Under Modi, in 2013 with the intention of having it published before the 2014 election. But your publisher at the time deemed that it represented a quote-unquote serious legal risk given the likely outcome of the 2014 elections. The book, as a result, never saw the light of day. Tell us how you finally managed, almost a decade later, to get this book published.
Yes, this book has some history. All books have some history behind them, but this one has a very torturous history. I started to do fieldwork in Gujarat in 2001, the year when Narendra Modi became chief minister. And I visited the state for interviews and data collection every year till 2020. I do not cite all my sources in the book because some of my informants have asked me not to do so. So to respond to your question, in 2013, when the publishing house, which was supposed to publish this book in India, asked me to cut hundreds of sentences, I preferred to defer its publication. Modi became prime minister 6 months later, and I decided to write Modi's India instead, a book that was published also in India, in the US, and in UK. Then I decided to revisit the 2013 manuscript by 2021 in a rather different perspective, to show that Modi's policies and polity, in fact, had crystallized in Gujarat. So I naturally retained all the empirical data that I had collected when he was chief minister, but I reorganized this material to show that the pillars of Modi's rule in Gujarat remain the same after 2014. So as a political scientist, really, there was a research question behind. I wanted to elucidate this question: how could a regional politician who had never occupied any position at the national level could transpose at a national level, you can say at a semi-continental level, the same techniques he had mastered in his state. And nobody had never, ever achieved this before. So that was the entry point. And the techniques he mastered indeed in Gujarat are rather well known now, but they were new at that time.
So I don't know if you want to take this opportunity, Christophe, but you did manage to find a publisher, both abroad and in India, that would publish this book in 2024. Do you want to say a word about how that came to pass?
Yes, I think it's very important to pay homage, to recognize the courage of those who are prepared to take risks. That's true of journalists, and we are very fortunate to have in India journalists who have the courage. But it's also true of publishers. And I'm very grateful to Westland and to my publisher, Kartika, for publishing this book. They had also published Modi's India in India. And now, next month, in June 2024, this book will see the light of the day in India itself, under a different title, but the content is the same.
Your work, as you mentioned, began well before Modi became a national figure. And just to build on what you said a second ago, I just want to quote a passage from the book where you explained why it was necessary to study and interrogate the Gujarat model. You say, quote, "Never had a leader won 3 consecutive state elections without ever having stood for elected office. Never before had a chief minister become prime minister and been elected without having previously held national office, and never had the BJP ruled a state for as long as it has. It has controlled Gujarat since 1998, right? I mean, it's pretty stark when you write it so bluntly. Take us back for a second to 2001. At that point, Narendra Modi was not a known figure, right? He wasn't even a provincial politician. He had been working behind the scenes for the Sangh Parivar, for the BJP. What brought you to Gujarat in 2001 to start studying this man and his leadership?
Well, I went there for the first time even before, just after the earthquake. The February 2001 earthquake was what brought me there, because of the NGO work that was taking place at that time. Massive, amazing work. And
this, we should just remind our listeners, this was the horrific Bhuj earthquake, which was an incredibly strong natural disaster that wreaked real destruction in a section of Gujarat.
Yeah. The epicenter was indeed in Kutch. But you could see the impact even in Ahmedabad, hundreds of kilometers away. And when the pogrom of 2022 occurred exactly 1 year later, a little bit more than 1 year later, I revisited the place and met the same NGO people, because the same NGOs who had done such a marvelous work in 2001 were also doing the same kind of work for other kinds of refugees and victims. Yeah. To respond to your question, Milan, yes, Modi was completely unknown. He had been parachuted to Gujarat by Vajpayee and Advani, Prime Minister Vajpayee and Home Minister Advani, who were trying to find someone who could do damage control, because BJP was losing one election after the other. They were losing local elections, they were losing by-elections. So they sent a man who had never been elected to any position, but who was the organizer, who had been the main organizer of BJP in Gujarat for decades. He was primarily a man who was behind the scene, indeed, but he could appear as the main force who could replace Keshubhai Patel, who was also a rather aging chief minister. And the rest is history.
I want to ask you about the BJP's dominance in Gujarat, because as you note in the book, it's partially a result of its approach, its policies, its organization. But you argue that the BJP's hegemony in Gujarat cannot be fully understood without reference to the specific ways in which the Congress ruled before it, right? So I'm wondering if you could just kind of take us back. What were the elements of the Congress decline in Gujarat that helped to kind of facilitate the BJP's rise, right? What did that transition look like?
Yes. In fact, right from my first book, the 1999 book that I did on Hindu nationalism, I always try to understand its politics in the larger context of the political system at large. BJP never operated in a vacuum. There is a dominant party before BJP, and that is the Congress. But in Gujarat, Congress is a very specific animal, very different from what Congress is elsewhere. And there is an interesting paradox, in fact, that results from the ambivalence of Congress in Gujarat. Because in that state, the party is like a Janus. On one end, you have the progressive followers of Mahatma Gandhi, including Indulali Yagnik, a pro-poor activist. On the other, you have the conservative followers of Mahatma Gandhi, including Vallabhbhai Patel, who prevailed and virtually expelled Yagnik from Congress. Yagnik will come back only after Indira broke with the Patelites, who formed the Congress O, including Morarji Desai. And Yagnik will be elected member of parliament in Ahmedabad in the early 70s. The same seat, by the way, where Ehsan Jaffrey will be elected soon after he died. But the Patelites had dominated Congress in the 50s and 60s, and they helped the Hindu nationalists to take root in Gujarat. Some of them even, if you remember well, joined Vishwa Hindu Parishad. K.M. Munshi, for instance, who is so an important figure on this side of the spectrum, conservative Congress. But Congress was such an ambivalent force that the progressive wing recovered and finally took over power when Mrs. Gandhi created her own Congress party. And the heir of Yagnik is no one else but Mara Singh Solanki. And as chief minister of Gujarat in the 80s, Solanki promoted reservations, positive discrimination in favor of lower caste, in such a way that the Patels, who had been behind Congress forever, shifted to BJP. Which means that Congress has helped BJP in two ways. One, by preparing the ground for the Sangh Parivar. Two, by alienating the main dominant caste that made the success of BJP in the 90s. And the decline of Congress is largely due to the shift of Patels from Congress to BJP. And the Congress party has never fully recovered from that. In fact, it is still very weak in Gujarat.
I was intrigued by your statement, Christophe, that prior to 2001, Modi didn't consider himself to be a politician, right? And here we are 2.5 decades later. And he's not only the most popular politician in India. I mean, some would say he's the most popular democratically elected politician, in the world, right? So one tends to think that he was always cut from a certain cloth. But if you kind of go back to 2000, 2001, how did he see himself before becoming chief minister?
Well, he is a pure product of the RSS. An organization he joined as a child. He was 7 or 8 years old when he joined RSS. And he rose step by step in the organization till he became Pran Pracharak, the chief organizer of the province. He was not a party person. He was not indeed a politician. And when Advani picked it up and appointed him organizing secretary of BJP, he still continued to look at him as a non-politician. When Vajpayee asked him to take over as chief minister, he says, "I'm not the right person for the job. I don't know politics." This is indeed very paradoxical. And to some extent, there is a form of, again, ambivalence, you can say hypocrisy in this. Because at the same time, this man is very much attracted by the public scene. And this is something we see for the first time when he is asked by Advani again to organize the Gujarat leg of his Rath Yatra. The first leg, by the way, the first phase of this very long procession, quote unquote. And then he will be asked to organize Murli Manohar Joshi's Ekta Yatra from Kanyakumari to Srinagar. And there he shows that is very much interested in relating to the people, talking to the people. So he is a politician without admitting that this is a tag Well, many populists don't want to appear as politicians. Most of the populists, on the contrary, claim that they are outsiders. They are not part of this personnel. They are so much anti-establishment. They need to appear as different, and it's true of Modi, like many others.
You narrate that fateful BJP executive meeting in 2002 in Goa, which took place after the Gujarat riots earlier that year. And I think is well known now, Modi came close to losing his job in the aftermath of the pogrom. Tell us what ultimately saved him. What was the scene there that led him to continue his job?
Well, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee wanted him to go. He had come to Ahmedabad immediately after the pogrom, and he had been horrified by what he had seen and heard. And until the Goa meeting, it seemed that Vajpayee was about to prevail, was in a position to prevail. In Goa, Modi received the support again of L.K. Advani. It's fascinating to think about the way L.K. Advani has been rewarded for all the support he gave to Modi for years. But Advani was not the only one who fully supported him. The party cadres, the RSS cadres, the Sangh Parivar cadres think about the Vishwa Hindu Parishad at that time, a very important movement, fully behind Modi. Togaria in Gujarat is fully behind Modi. He embodied at that time an alternative to the Vajpayee line. For Modi, moderation a la Vajpayee had to be replaced by polarization, by a different strategy that would make the Hindutva forces free from their inhibition and would make them free from the quest of partners like in the NDA. And that line at that time prevailed. For me, the turning point is there. 2002 is really the beginning of a shift away from the strategy of BJP, the BJP of the 80s and 90s, and 2014 is the logical conclusion of this turning point, or this phase of transition.
Christophe, can I just ask you a question that's a bit of a tangent? But, if you go back to 2002, right, you had Vajpayee, who was framed as the moderate against Advani, the hardliner. And then 10 years later, you had Advani framed as the moderate to Modi, the hardliner. Modi now is framed as the moderate compared to Yogi Adityanath as the hardliner. Is there something intrinsic to BJP politics or to the Sangh Parivar that leads to these kind of changes, where you take people who are seen more on the fringes, quote unquote, or extremes, and then they're essentially shifted into the mainstream? Is this a natural progression that takes place in parties like the BJP?
Well, in parties which, as opposition parties, can be very radical, but which need to be more pragmatic, practical, moderate once they are in office. I think this is the main reason why we see this center of gravity changing. And it's not only true for BJP, it's true for other parties of the same kind elsewhere. Also, I would say there is something a little bit artificial in this. I think they play games, they play roles. It was very clear when you had this duo, Vajpayee and Advani at the helm, good cup, bad cup. You needed someone to speak to the allies, someone to show the militants, activists that you were still faithful to your ideology. So it's also for the gallery and not only for real reasons that they
right. I mean, because just to put your point more provocatively, it's a way to say that Modi is kind of the moderate. And Amit Shah and Yogi Adityanath are pushing the envelope, which then unburdens Modi from having to back those positions.
Yeah.
Where, in fact, your argument is they're essentially all pushing in the same direction. But you can have this good cop, bad cop approach, which is for the public consumption.
Exactly.
Let's just come now to the major framing of this book, right, which is broken into 5 parts, built around the 5 pillars of the Gujarat model under Modi. Each of these pillars is very detailed, very complex, but I'm wondering if you could just briefly lay out these 5 pillars kind of in summary, and then maybe we can go through a few of them in more detail.
Sure. 4 of these pillars go back to Modi's strategy. The 5th one is a little bit different. It's more the outcome. But the 4 pillars of Modi's strategy in Gujarat that have been transposed to the national scene later on are primarily, first of all, polarization. Polarization that is, of course, very much there in 2002, but that was there before. As BJP organizing secretary in the 1980s, Modi believes in polarization that implies a certain dose of violence. The 1985 riots are a clear demonstration of the kind of violence you need for preparing the public sphere, for preparing elections. And in 2002, it worked rather well. There is a clear correlation between the places where BJP won and the places where riots were at their worst in terms of casualties. This correlation is giving us a map of the effectiveness of polarization. The second pillar is, in fact, a kind of sequel of that. Capturing key institutions, including the police and the judiciary, had become necessary after the pogrom. But it became a policy. It became a real pillar of this strategy. And it applies to the police and the judiciary. It applies to other institutions. The Lokayukt, for instance, the Election Commission of the state. Name one institution, and you see this amazing institution capture as a key, I would say, asset of Modi's Gujarat. IAS officers have been also co-opted in large numbers, and many of them, IPS officers as well as IAS officers, have followed him and Amit Shah in Delhi, by the way. There is a personal relationship behind that. The third pillar, you can call it a new political economy. Of course, the economy has always played a very big role in Gujarat. Gujarat is the industrial state par excellence, and you can't ignore this force. But Modi has been very selective in the way he has related to businessmen who became his cronies and started to pay back one election campaign after the other. And Gautam Adani, of course, who had supported him in 2002, is the first exemplar of this form of crony capitalism. So SEZs, special economic zones, were created for them. They got 0% interest rate loans, land at a very low price, and so on and so forth. Big projects, as a result, prevailed at the expense of SMEs. And a state that was a state of entrepreneurs became more a state of big capitalists, investing in infrastructure, investing in big projects, mega projects. This is the key word that Narendra Modi himself used. So that's the third pillar. And the fourth one, of course, is Modi himself. he learned how to become what he is today, and he speaks about him in the third person all the time, as you know. In Gujarat, the way he relates directly to the people via social media, via holograms, via TV channels he created for himself, all that was learned in Gujarat. And what is even more important, possibly, is the fact that these techniques help him to emancipate himself from the BJP. And he ignored the BJP till Keshubhai Patel exerted some influence over the party, and he emancipated himself from RSS too. And he refused to report to the Pran Pracharak and alienated many people of the Sangh Parivar. So he was clearly his own master, relating to the people directly, the populist way, the national populist way. And I say national populist because his people are not all the people, but the Hindus. It's, of course, how he related to the old notion of the Gujarati Asmita. The Gujarati Asmita has clear affinities with Hinduism. This is the only, by the way, the only state probably in India where sub-nationalism is not embodied in anything else but Hinduism. So the fifth pillar is different and can be understood in terms of who are the winners, who are the losers. What is the support base on the one hand, and who are those who are just, well, not taken care of or even repressed and suppressed. Well, the politics of Modi here is divisive, not only in terms of religion, but in terms of social groups. Some groups are deliberately supported. Middle class, the urban middle class, the upper caste urban middle class. Plus, and that's what is so interesting in Gujarat, what he calls the neo-middle class, the emerging middle class, OBCs, who come from the village, join the suburbs, and start a new job. Drivers, caretakers, whatever. And they will definitely shift from Congress to BJP when they will migrate from the village to the city. Those who are the losers are clearly Muslims, minorities at large, but also Dalits, Adivasis, and the dissenters. Because what we see very, very soon, very quickly, is a repression of NGOs, of the media. The coverage by NDTV of the Gujarat pogrom has made Modi very critical of the media, clearly, and intellectuals at large, including those who are working in state universities, because most of the universities are captured as well, and the VCs are fellow travelers when they are not RSS members themselves. So this is, again, something that foreshadow what we will see at the national level.
Hey, Grant Tamasha listeners. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Putting this show together each week is a labor of love, but it takes a lot of work to put out a great show every week. If you'd like to support the work we do at Grant Tamasha, please visit ceip.org/donate. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favorite podcasting platform, so you'll be the first to know when a new episode rolls out. So, Christophe, let me just kind of ask you a couple of follow-ups and maybe to allow us to kind of dig into some of these pillars. Let's start with the deinstitutionalization of the rule of law agencies, right? And you talk about the police, you talk about the judiciary, you talk about investigative agencies. Now, if we step back and we look at India kind of nationally today, it's an open secret that most state chief ministers have found various ways to subvert rule of law institutions, right? They are misusing agencies, undermining the judiciary, politicizing the police. What, in your mind, was new or different or unique about the Gujarat model?
Well, certainly. The difference may be more in terms of degree than in kind. But there is a difference still, I think, for two reasons. One, Modi was in office for almost 13 years. Well, a long time. And BJP was there before and is still there. So the kind of deindustrialization that you can achieve when you are in office for so long, I think is very different than what occurs when after 5 years, maximum 10 years, there is a change of guard. I think that's one factor. The other reason why Gujarat may be very different on that front is the magnitude of the Gujarat riots themselves. Because after that, in the wake of this major event, something different had to be done as well. And policemen who had let violence occur had to be rewarded. Those who had tried to do their job had to be sidelined. And it meant a lot of change for the state police. I can't think of any state police so directly, badly affected by one event across the board. Dozens of IPS officers sidelined on the one hand, rewarded on the other. And in the context of this transformation of the police, you have a series of fake encounters after 2003. 2003 to 2007, you have almost 20 fake encounters when the police killed Muslims who were presented as Pakistani agents or jihadists intending to murder Modi himself. And that was another variant for the politics of fear. You know, it was polarization by other means. And you saw something that maybe we had also seen in Bombay in the 90s, 2000s. This is the only place where I could find such a large number of policemen responsible for fake encounters. And the 20-plus policemen who finally were arrested and put behind bars, gave to the police of Gujarat a very special name, that tag. That was there before to some extent. You know, again, I agree we should not magnify the differences. If you look at what the police of Gujarat was in the 80s, you see that already the nexus with policemen, with politicians, and mafias. You know, when you think about the Latif factor, for instance. So possibly the Gujarat police was already weak enough for all these things to happen. But as I show in this chapter, there is also an attempt at neutralizing the judiciary that is remarkably effective. And for instance, most of the public prosecutors were RSS men, and few of the accused of the pogrom were finally arrested. And in fact, many of those who had been arrested were freed on bail in the weeks, months, or years which followed.
You talk in this part and then in the next chapter about this notion of a deep state, right? And that term, of course, is something that's come back into the discourse these days, right? I mean, in this country, Donald Trump has railed against the ways in which the quote-unquote deep state has undermined his presidency, right? And if he were to come back next year, he would need to kind of eliminate them. But in the Indian context, tell us what the deep state refers to and how was it used in Gujarat and to what ends?
Yes, in fact, I use a different word. I speak of a deeper state because what I argue is that there is a continuity between the tip of the iceberg, that is the official state, and and those who are underground, more or less, unofficial, illegal even. A deep state is indeed those who exert some undue influence over the decision makers, who are like the Pakistani army, for instance, ruling from behind. A deeper state connects a government, institutions, and I would say the underbelly of the same group. In the case of Gujarat, it means that certainly Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, the Gujarat government has its own agenda, but keeps rather low-key rhetoric and do not indulge in violence by themselves or pressures or communalism. On the ground, vigilante groups, including at that time the Bajrang Dal. Bajrang Dal played a very important role in Gujarat. Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Bajrang Dal played a very important role, are exerting cultural policing, which means that they will check whether Muslim boys are not talking to Hindu girls on the university campuses, that Muslim farmers will not take cows or bovines to the slaughterhouse. They are like a militia. They are like a private army, and they are very well equipped. Incidentally, they also take care of caste issues. For instance, the Bajrang Dal in Ahmedabad will make sure that Patel girls do not elope with boys of a different caste group. Not only Muslims, but also people of different caste group. That is typical of the way RSS operates. Now, RSS is not so interested in capturing the state. Of course, to capture the state is useful because you can protect all your activities officially, with the official forces, the official police doing it for you. But they want to control society. They want to change society. They want to Hinduize the mindset of all those who are reluctant toward this kind of ideology. And therefore, a deeper state is in the making in Gujarat during the Modi years, to such an extent that even if today the government shifted to the opposition, that may not make any difference on that ground. And that's why what is legitimate may not necessarily be what is illegal. They can exert illegal activities vis-a-vis Muslims and others. That is legitimate because this is a way to enforce religious traditions, the Hindu tradition. That's the deeper state.
So, Christophe, you kind of, anticipated, I think, that where I wanted to ask you next, which is this relationship between Modi and the RSS Sangh Parivar, right? Because in the book, you recount in great detail the way in which he kind of brought them to heel. He subordinated them, right? And it's curious because one would think ideologically they should be more or less on the same page. But you document their very different style of functioning, the way in which Modi's concentration of power created a wedge between the Sangh Parivar on one hand, this family of Hindu nationalist kind of organizations, and the ruling party, the government. My question for you is this: why did the RSS stay silent? Why didn't they, given this tension was there, given that they're about the collective and not the individual, why didn't they directly confront Modi?
Yeah. Well, the question is interesting at both levels, at the Gujarat level, at the national level. At the state level, the rift was there as early as 2005, 2006, 2007. And in 2007, many RSS cadres refused to canvass for Modi. Partly because they were upset by the way he treated Keshubhai Patel, who had been stabbed in the back, literally. Partly because he did not report to RSS. He did not report to the Pran Pracharak. He was his own master. And Mohan Vaij, who was the Pran Pracharak, had to leave. He went to Chennai. So, yes, the question remains, why has RSS supported him finally, again, in 2012, and for the national job in 2013? Well, the main reason, I see two reasons. The two main reasons are, number one, the cadres were fully behind him. The top leaders, including Bhagwat, had strong reservations. He did not show them any respect in the first place. And he was so much full of himself that that was not at all the style of the RSS. That is a much more collegial organization. No cult of personality can prevail there. But the cadres, the Pracharak, the Swayamsevaks, were really enthused. He was their man. And therefore, the organization leaders could not ignore this popularity. Number two, who else? Who else could be the candidate for prime ministership in 2013? He had won 3 times state elections. At that time, Chauhan had not won yet. And BJP had to decide who will be its candidate. So by default, also, he could get the kind of support he received. And I would say thirdly, there is a third reason, in fact. In 2013, RSS could not afford to lose elections. First of all, you can't lose so many times in a row. And secondly, you may remember that many RSS leaders were suspected of what Chidambaram at that time called Hindu terrorism. And there were cases, including the Samjhota Express case, with substantial pieces of evidence that indeed at the highest level of RSS, people had resorted to illegal means. These cases had to be stopped. The state had to be captured. The government had to be captured. For all these reasons, a marriage of convenience took place. But we could see, and we can see today, that Modi continues to rely on non-RSS parallel structures, power structures, as much as he can. He has his own spin doctors. He has his own advisors, and at the same time, RSS is not supporting Modi at the highest level in a very public manner. Even in the current election campaign.
But it is interesting to go back to 2012. Christophe, you'll recall you and I were there in Gujarat at the same time. We met, in fact, in Ahmedabad. And there was a feeling that if Modi were to win that election, which of course he did, that it was an inevitability that he would then catapult to the national level, right? There was a sense that if he clinched that third consecutive victory, there was nothing that could stop him. Precisely, I think, because the cadres, the rank and file, whatever their leadership might think or not think, was behind him, right? And I think that feeling was certainly in Gujarat anyway at the time, I think, palpable. But of course, it was much more than Gujarat. That it was spread nationwide, which, let me just try to pivot this a little bit to thinking nationally now, because one of the things you do, and you said at the beginning, is the benefit of putting this book aside for a while allowed you to then look at the pillars of Modi's rule in Gujarat and then look at how they transpose themselves to the national level after being prime minister for 10 years, right? And here's a tension that I found a little bit in the book, and I want to just draw you out on that. You write that Modi's policies as chief minister in many ways disadvantaged minorities. And as you said before, not just Muslims, but also Dalits, Adivasis, that in many ways, whether it's budgetary allocations, welfare schemes and so on, these groups are marginalized. But if you look at the BJP nationally today, right, they are not only the party of the upper caste, right? They are winning more backward, more Dalit, more tribal votes than any other party. Is there a break? Is there a shift? Or can you draw a line from his time as chief minister to his time as prime minister now?
No, I think there is a shift. This is one of the 2 or 3 differences there are between Modi as chief minister and Modi as prime minister. And that's one of the 2 or 3 differences we can scrutinize. How do you explain that? Well, one, before 2013, Modi did not project himself as an OBC person. Never. And he started to do it when he knew that he would have to conquer the Indie Belt. He would have to speak to the Biharis. He would have to speak to the voters of Uttar Pradesh. And therefore, he started to relate to this identity, to narrate the Chaiwala legend. That's one. 2, as prime minister, he was in a position to implement a kind of social welfare policy that was very personalized. So he could give gas cylinders with his photograph on them to the poor. And that has certainly made some impact on some of the Dalits and Adivasis you mentioned. Third, Sanskritization continued to play a very big role. And the way he appears now as the high priest of Hinduism, another big difference, by the way. He did not play that role as chief minister, never. Now he can appear in Ayodhya when he inaugurates the temple as the high priest of Hinduism. And Sanskritization remains a very important factor for bringing Dalits on the BJP side, on the RSS itself. And probably as important is the last factor. When you look at who are the Dalit candidates BJP nominates, they do not give tickets to dominant Dalit Jatis, Jatavs, Mahars, and Jatavs in Uttar Pradesh, Mahars in Maharashtra, are not at all those they privilege and promote. They promote non-dominant Dalit Jatis, which have not benefited from reservations as much as the dominant Dalit Jatis, and who resent precisely the fact that these dominant Jatis have cornered the reservations. And that is what Amit Shah in the first place has somewhat invented, a paradox of reservations. Reservations have not benefited to poorer Dalits, and they are the ones who now support BJP. The paradox is complete, because you have a new coalition of extreme, to paraphrase Paul Brass. I think it plays a very important role. The poor who are supporting BJP among the Dalits come from very specific Jatis, Balmikis, Kartiks, Bangis, who are also Balmikis, not Jatavs, not Mahars.
So, Christophe, let me just conclude maybe with the final question that I can't resist to ask you since you're here. We're, of course, recording this on May 20th in the middle of an incredibly long and increasingly interesting, in some ways, general election contest. If you could reflect kind of on the findings of your book, how does this 2024 campaign fit with your framework? And are there new elements, perhaps, that have taken place over the past several weeks, which have surprised you?
Well, the 5 pillars are there. Polarization. Who would have expected such a communal campaign from Narendra Modi? So to polarize, to play the religious card in Ayodhya or against Muslims remains a very important dimension of his politics. Secondly, capture of institutions. Well, the way the Election Commission is diluting its mandate today is a clear reflection that it's not only the police, it's not only the Lokpal, but also the Election Commission that is now, quote-unquote, captured. Crony capitalism, well, what can we say? It's so blatant. It's very much obvious with the same people than in Gujarat, almost. Fourth, of course, populism is still the style. This campaign, this BJP campaign is more Modi-centric, well, at least as Modi-centric as the previous ones. So we still have the same modus operandi with Narendra Modi systematically attacking the Nehru-Gandhi family, accusing them to play a Muslim card. This is something I should have mentioned. That was key to the 2012 elections. The 2012 elections took place in Gujarat, but it was Modi versus the Nehru-Gandhi family and versus the Delhi Sultanate. He called Delhi the Delhi Sultanate at that time. The fifth pillar, again, the losers are largely the same, with this caveat that we have just mentioned. Maybe the poor are now more attracted than before by BJP, but still, it's a pro-rich policy. It's a pro-urban policy. Farmers have been at the receiving end, and it's a very authoritarian modus operandi at the expense of universities, NGOs, think tanks. Think about CPR. Well, all that was there before. What is not there in Gujarat and cannot be there in Gujarat is, of course, the attack on federalism. As chief minister, Narendra Modi was very much for federalism. As prime minister, he has over-centralized the country, but that is not because he has changed, it's because his position has changed. Where he has probably changed, I want to emphasize this. This election campaign is really giving him some religious character. And the Ayodhya moment, the inauguration of the temple, really showed him in a position we had never seen him before, and certainly not in Gujarat. In Gujarat, he was close to the Swaminarayan movement. He was close to the priests of the Swaminarayan movement, but he did not embody any religious role. Is he transitioning towards a new kind of character? Is he withdrawing from the world to some extent? He will have to think about the next phase. You may have started to think about the next phase.
But Christophe, just one other thing before we conclude is, there has been a lot of reporting, including in the print yesterday, and we'll link to that, even in the comments of J.P. Nadda, the BJP president, of hinting at tensions between the party and the RSS. In multiple dimensions, the BJP saying, well, when we were younger, we had to rely on them much more, but now the situation is different. But reporting from the ground in places like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and elsewhere saying that the RSS Sangh Parivar cadres are somewhat undermobilized, unenthusiastic, or maybe a little bit jaded. I mean, so there does seem to be something interesting here, unless it's all just political soap opera and there's nothing real to it, which is also possible. But did that aspect strike you?
Yes, but that was there before. That is not terribly new. We saw that in Gujarat with ups and downs. The main thing RSS is winning is, will he win again? Will he win a full mandate? If not, has he to be replaced? But I think it's really a kind of wait and watch situation because, as you said, ideologically there is no difference. So before somewhat dissenting, RSS will have to figure out what could be the B plan if there is a B plan. But the election results will be the key factor for this next phase. If there is a question on can BJP retain a majority with Modi at its helm.
My guest on the show this week is the scholar Christophe Jaffrelot. He is the author of the brand new book, Gujarat Under Modi, Laboratory of Today's India. He is the Avantha Chair and Professor of Indian Politics and Sociology at the King's India Institute. He also teaches at Sciences Po and is a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment. Christophe, congratulations on this work. I know from past conversations this is something that has been on your mind in one way or another for 25 years. And so I'm very glad it's out into the world, and thank you for taking the time for us today.
Thank you, Milan.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. This podcast is an HT Smartcast original and is available on htsmartcast.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we mentioned on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Tim Martin is our audio engineer, and Mira Verghese is our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This was a Hindustan Times production brought to you by HT Smartcast.
HT Smartcast.